So yesterday afternoon, UNC hired a new basketball head coach, and that coach is Mike Malone, the previous NBA champion with the Denver Nuggets, and he was fired from the Nuggets a couple seasons ago, has been sitting out there, and Carolina goes with him. So this really marks a trend of the last two big coaches for Carolina, Bill Belichick and now Malone, coming from the pros, guys with serious pro success that had a little bit of a bump towards the end there, and then Carolina decided to pull the trigger. And I think there's a lot of things here to dissect. So the first is Malone is only 54. Some people might think he's in his late 60s. This is very different than bringing in a 73-year-old Bill Belichick to replace a 70-plus-year-old Mac Brown. It's a different kind of move. You're not doing this as a short-term deal. In many ways, I think Malone could be the coach here at Carolina for a long time. And I think part of the reason that they went with Malone, which we'll dive into right here, is that some of the other top targets, Tommy Lloyd for Arizona, who was under the Mark Few group, who, of course, Mark Few came from the Roy Williams tree. So I think there are some connections there with Lloyd. And then Dusty May as well, just who won the national championship with Michigan. Both those guys are not leaving. Lloyd signed a new extension. May is seemingly going to stay at Michigan for this foreseeable future. Nate Oates signed an extension with Alabama, making him one of the top five highest paid coaches. I think Olsbringer for Iowa State also did not express interest. He was also older as well. So they also passed up on Billy Donovan, who had won multiple championships at Florida. But I honestly don't know that Donovan would have been the right hire to begin with. He won in an era of recruiting, in an era of Florida being a huge name. It's not the same today. And I think this really gets into the idea is what is the value of being a blue blood? Carolina has 6 national championship banners, but right now you can't get players in the door in recruiting if you don't have money. And so the blue blood might be there to provide money. But I think the question that we got to ask is what's the value of the name? Teams like Texas, like Tennessee, some of the Big Ten teams, Penn State, Michigan, they're going to be able to pay these guys serious bucks to come in. And we're seeing the landscape of college basketball change. What you might think is potentially a good hire in the past is not necessarily going to be the same thing. We just saw Dusty May win a national championship with 5 transfer players, one of which coming from Carolina. And that's indicative of deeper trends here. It's not as much about talent acquisition in terms of recruiting, in terms of culture building, keeping guys around. Sure, some teams can do it like UConn, but we're going to start seeing new coaches emerge as really, really great portal guys that can rally and build an identity with minimal time with these players. And I think Danny Hurley is the perfect example of that, of a guy that is doing just about the best in terms of retaining talent in the country. Having Caravan, a 4-year player, other than losing guys to the NBA, Hurley's guys don't transfer. And I think that's what Malone is going to seek to do. Now, looking at Malone's NBA record, of course, he was hired for Sacramento after being an assistant. I think he was an assistant for Providence and Oakland and Manhattan, and then jumped up to the Knicks out of that New York coaching tree. Went to the Cavs, the Hornets, the Warriors. He was an assistant there in the early 2010s. Brought over to the Kings to be a head coach. Didn't do great. He was fired at the start of his second season, and then he was hired at Denver. And I think a lot of people had questions for Denver, but what we saw with Denver was Malone was able to build just an offensive juggernaut and really work with the players. He's a great coach in terms of development. You look at Jokic, at Murray, at Porter Jr., Christian Brown, all these guys developed under Malone. And I think different than some other NBA coaches where their schemes, the way that they can really maximize on the capabilities of players, Malone is probably one of the best development, quote-unquote, coaches, I would say, of the 2010s. Reading into Jokic's journey and how Malone restructured the offense, how he believed in Jokic, how he worked with him as well. Those things in today's college basketball game, the way that Malone was able to do it in the pros, that's going to be much more similar to a college game per se. And now, can you keep players around for as long? That's the question. But if Malone can get great players in the door, UNC is going to be a very good team. Of course, we're only a few seasons removed from a championship for Malone in Denver and multiple semifinal appearances. I mean, this team is the Nuggets were a fantastic team. I still don't really know why Malone was fired. It was disagreements with the management organization. I don't know how he wasn't picked up by another team. But in terms of, quality candidates and basketball pedigree, he's a pretty good name. Now, what is the transition going to be like? This is kind of the question that we see. We saw Harbaugh make it far in the pros, come back to college, and do well. Is that the kind of thing that Malone can do? Guys, he's still only 54 years old. There's a lot of potential for him to grow. And I think another piece here is that coaches just didn't want to leave. And the allure of a blue blood in the past maybe was that the idea of, at this program, it's going to be easier to acquire talent. It's going to be easier to keep guys there. There's kind of this NBA pipeline. Maybe the educational piece of a Carolina or a Duke as well is superior to some other places. But we don't see that being the case today. And money is the king. So Carolina's going to have the money. They're going to have the funds. And the question for me is his recruiting. I really, that's the biggest thing here. I don't know. I have no idea. Can he recruit? Is he going to be able to get good players in the door? I know that Carolina's already lost 3 or 4 guys to the portal. And yeah, there's going to be a little bit less continuity maybe than we expect. But it's not going to be a bone-dry roster like some of the other ones that we've seen. In women's college basketball, Tennessee has 0 players for next year. That's really an impossible challenge to overcome here. And I think when you bring in a new guy that doesn't necessarily have a bunch of connections to a program, or we've seen this across the ACC, it takes a few years to get guys in there, to recruit your guys, to bring players over from where you were before, but to really just kind of establish any sense of a program, because it's really hard in today's game in this starting phase unless you can just bring guys, transition them over from wherever you were. And so Malone's going to have a little bit of a leash. He's going to have time to figure it out. And I'm really interested to see what his coaching philosophy is. Is Malone going to be a guy that is going to just go heavy into the portal the whole way around? I don't know. Is he going to be a guy that follows Dusty May? Is he going to be a guy that follows Lloyd, where you go for 1 or 2 recruits and you just get portal guys? That seems to be how college basketball is headed. What direction? And some of these players that you might have seen in Carolina Blue stick around forever, those guys are transferring now. And so how is Malone going to keep players in? How is he going to work the portal? There's a lot of questions. This really hire raises a lot of questions, but it's hard to have an accurate judgment for me until we see a few seasons. You can't really evaluate this move, because what other choices did UNC have? You want to get a coach in there early. You don't want to be an NC State. You don't want to be some of these other programs that are lower level hires and job opportunities in the conference, and then you're scrambling as all your players hit the portal. That's really, really tricky. They wanted to get this done early. They wanted to give him time to still work in some guys, towards the latter half of the recruiting class. Most of the guys have signed, but this will give him time to work in spring ball, get a few months of practice and such under the belt for a lot of the players that are staying. It'll give him time to really work a whole portal cycle, and it's good for the fan base and the donors as well. If you're giving a lot of money to North Carolina basketball, you want to know who the coach is. Some people aren't going to be happy, but honestly, what other choice do they have? Is Carolina going to hire somebody from, a VCU, a USF, a St. Louis, that's not necessarily going to move the needle for UNC. I think a lot of people have questions of, for a program like Carolina, do you hire a young, unproven guy, or do you hire a proven guy in another situation? Hubert Davis was a good coach. Objectively, he's probably a top 30, top 40 coach in basketball. He's a good coach, and in his first coaching job, he didn't live up to the expectations of North Carolina basketball, and so he's fired. He made the tournament. He made a run to the Final Four, mostly with Roy Williams' players, but he didn't win enough. And can you expect a guy to come from a Group of Five conference, well, not Group of Five, but non-Power Five conference, and really elevate the ceiling of Carolina to potential Final Fours, to championships, to that? That's a harder stretch to see than somebody like Malone coming in here who's won at the NBA level, won championships, developed players, to see him come in and change the program. So personally, I am not going to just evaluate this now, but I think it was a better move than, it certainly is not the worst thing that Carolina could have done. Again, this is completely different than Bill Belichick. I think it's better. I think it's better than most of the other options. To throw around millions of dollars at an unproven young coach, can work out. Does it work out most of the time? No. And to see those coaches in a bigger ACC with more money, I think it's difficult when the athletic directors as well have a lot of power. When those young guys come in, they're not going to have a lot of say in the program. They're going to see new facilities, a lot more money, and the administration can control a lot of those things. It's harder for these guys to really make their mark. And then when you get a bigger name guy in that actually can control, he's able to shape more of the pieces of the program around it. So I think Malone in that way is going to know in what ways to work the administration, in what ways to ask for more NIL, how to structure the program. And again, he's young, he's adaptable. We've seen him work in the NBA. And I hope for Carolina's sake that this move works out, because if it's not, it's going to set you back a lot of time and potentially, set you back 5 to 10 years if you can't recruit, can't win in the ACC. So for Carolina's sake, I hope it works. I personally have faith in Malone, and we'll see what happens in the next few years.